I want to continue by saying that Mark very, very clearly will tell us that Jesus could do no deed of power. The Matthean Jesus, we are told, did not do in Matthew 13, 53 to 58, where a similar scene is. Matthew will change Mark to say Jesus could not do. No, he says Jesus did not do. So Matthew will put the onus on Jesus. It is because Jesus did not want to do that he did not do. But as Mark says, no, even if Jesus could have wanted, he could not do. Now notice, this is a very strong statement. He could do no deed of power there. And Mark will give the reason. Mark will give the reason because of their unbelief. So once again, Mark seems to stress that faith is required. And as a matter of fact, I can even go so far as to say that faith is a necessary requirement. Second, what Mark wants to also indicate is that sometimes this negative impression which people has can make us impotent. This is very, very important, especially when we are living in community. There are times, and I would hope not many times, but there are certainly times when we, like the people of the hometown of Jesus, are jealous about a companion. A companion is talented in this field and in that field and in another field. A companion is intelligent and is getting the highest marks. A companion is doing so well and thought well of by the superiors. A companion is accepted by the people when he goes for ministry and so on. Now what happens sometimes is that when we keep on reacting, we get upset with our companion and we tend to pull the companion down. We tend to pull the companion down, and this is what we need to watch for. Let the companion do what the companion has to do. There is no need for me to compare. And my mind must always go back to the story of Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16, and tell myself, I am not going to be like those workers who were hired in the morning and look at how much the others are being paid. No, let me see. Did I agree for 1 denarius? Yes, I did. I'm happy with it. Is this the kind of person I am? Yes, I am happy with it. And again, you don't have to be, for example, some people say, no, but you may not be good at this, but you're very good in another thing. There's no need for that also. There's no need for that. I may be good at nothing. It doesn't matter. You see, somebody may say, you're not very good at studies, but then you're very good at games. Or you're not very good at volleyball, but you're excellent at basketball. There's no need for that. There's no need for you to be good at anything. What is the need for? To simply be yourself. Just be yourself. Now, what is important? There is the need, I would believe, to be content with yourself. So you don't have to be good at games. You don't have to be good at academics. You don't have to be good at organizing people. You don't have to be good at preaching. You don't have to be good at anything. The only thing you need to be good at is to accept yourself. When you accept yourself wholly and completely, and a beautiful, beautiful example is John the Baptizer. Wonderful example. So he's powerful in his own way. He's unique in his own way. He's special in his own way, but he also knows who he is. And he very clearly, more than others, does not want to be another, does not want to be another. I don't want to be you. But this is what will happen. And so therefore we need to be careful. Because sometimes when the superior or the rector or whoever it is might praise our companion, we might feel a little upset. that they're only praising him, they're only applauding him, and so on. We need to be wary. So be careful about this, because then what happens is that there are times, unfortunately, when we, the internal people who are within the community, we make our own companions impotent. You might remember when I said Mark 1:16 to 20, the call of the first four, Simon and Andrew, who are casting their net. That is one part of the ministry. But James and John are mending their net, and that is another part of the ministry. So here we come to the mending the net, the healing of breaches within the community. The community of Jesus, the townspeople, could not accept that he had flown so high. They wanted him to remain on the ground and not fly so high and reach the skies. And that's why they took offense at him. And that's why I said right at the first lecture, when I told you Mark is the only one who uses this term son of Mary, I said I regard it as a derogatory title, as a negative title, because of what follows. And we see not only what follows, but we also see the effect of their reaction on Jesus, who could do no deed of power. And not only that Jesus is amazed. So he is amazed, in a sense, amazed because that is never what you would have expected. While he need not have expected that they would approve of him and they would applaud him and they would carry him on their shoulders, this kind of thing amazes him, because he says, what is the reason? You see, he's so pure of heart that he says, I cannot understand it. I cannot understand. So his amazement is from not being able to understand how people can think in this manner. That is basically how I interpret his amazement. And finally, I like to end by making this, and I've said this very often in different places and at different times. Be careful of saying, I know. You may miss the Messiah. Now, in our own context, what we sometimes do is we stereotype people or we label people based on the religion, based on the language, based on the places where they were born, based on the color of their skin, based on their caste. And there are other distinctions we make. Now, when we make such distinctions, this is what we tend to say. Oh, these people who practice this religion, they are always like that. Oh, these people who come from this place, oh, they are always like that. And we tend to generalize. We tend to put them in a bracket. We tend to put them in a pigeonhole. Sometimes I go to a parish or I go to a new place. And when I reach there, where people don't really know me, almost always, I am asked two questions. The first, they know that I am a priest. Father, what is your name? That's the first question. So I tell them my name. And almost even before I've completed telling them my name, the second question is asked, where are you from? And when I'm asked the question, where I am from, I point to heaven. And they look on top and they know what I'm doing. And they say, yeah, Father, all of us are from heaven. But where are you from? And once again, I point to heaven. And then the manner in which I look at them makes them stop asking the question. And the reason why I point up to heaven with my thumb is because of this particular text. While it is okay to know where I am from, what is not okay and what you will tend to do, whether you like it or not, you will tend to do this. Oh, Father is from this place. There must be like this. I'm not saying that it is negative, it is positive, it is neutral. No, the question is, why Because a person is from a particular place, why should you and I label that person? Why should you and I label a person who practices a particular religion, or who speaks a particular language, or who's of a particular skin color? This is what the townspeople of Jesus did, and they missed the Messiah. And this is what we do. So we need to be careful of putting labels. In logic, we have studied what is known as the fallacy of overgeneralization, namely, you cannot move from the particular to the universal. That is a logical fault, a logical failing. If you try to move from a particular to the universal, you're not logical. For example, if I say some human beings are mortal, some human beings are mortal. Notice that's particular, some. I am a human being. I cannot conclude, therefore I am mortal. Some is already particular. However, when there is universality, supposing you say all human beings are mortal, all, if you make that statement, all human beings, that's called a universal statement. All human beings are mortal. I am a human being, and now I can conclude I am mortal. So notice, some people of this particular faith, or some people of that particular language, some people of that particular color behave in this manner. It doesn't mean that all behave. And that's why we need to be careful. And so I'm fond of telling people, be careful of saying, I know, you may miss the Messiah. And so we come to the last chapter of the Galilee section, where the kingdom is for Jew and Gentile. And like in the earlier two cases, the two chapters, this also is divided into four parts: the summary, disciples, the kingdom, which is the broader part, and the conflict here is created by the disciples. The summary is in a very brief statement, only half a verse, but it tells us a number of things. First, when it tells us, then he, by the word, the he, the pronoun he, refers to Jesus. So he is Jesus, went about among the villages teaching. So first of all, he went about. We might remember in chapter 1, verses 35 to 39, when Simon and his companions hunt Jesus out. They hunt him down because they want him to remain there. Jesus says at that time, we must go about, because for that is why I came. So now, he's being true to the mission. It is not to a specific group, not to a particular group, not to a restricted group, but going about. So he goes about as an itinerant preacher, and even though he speaks in Luke about not having anywhere to lay his head, Luke chapter 9, verses 57 to 62, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. That is in the Gospel of Luke. But here, he goes about like this itinerant preacher, you might say, moving from place to place. And Mark here speaks about the villages. And usually the understanding is that in villages, there are by and large unlettered people, not people who are regularly considered as the intellectuals and the educated. Simple people working the land, working with their hands. These are people who usually live in villages. So Jesus is going among these places. And therefore, very clearly, if he's going among these places, and if in these places he is teaching, his teaching is very simple. His teaching is for the unlettered. His teaching does not require great intellectual ability. He teaches those who are in villages. In Mark 1:21 to 22, we were introduced already to the teaching of Jesus. And there we were told that he taught with authority and not as their scribes. So when Mark tells us here that Jesus is teaching what he is in effect saying, that Jesus is also acting. Because as far as Mark is concerned, the teaching of Jesus is never separated from his action. We also remember in Mark 1:27 to 37, when the people witness and experience the exorcism, they respond by saying, what is this, a new teaching with authority? So it's a new teaching. That is what I mean by saying there is a combination in Jesus of teaching and healing. There is never the teaching separate from the healing or the healing separate from the teaching. The second part of this chapter, after the summary, is about the disciples. If in the first part, the first 4 were called, in the second part, the 12 were named and chosen. Here, the 12 are sent. The kingdom here is for Jew and Gentile, and the conflict is with his own disciples in this particular section. And so, in Mark, the mission discourse is made up of 7 verses. Mark chapter 6, verses 7 to 13 make up Mark's mission discourse. In Luke, there are 2 mission discourses, one in chapter 9 and the other in chapter 10. This mission discourse in chapter 9 is to the 12, and this mission discourse in chapter 10 is to the 70. In Luke's gospel, clearly, mission is not restricted to the 12. Mission is also for the general. The 70 or 72 refers to the Gentile nations, and so mission is already universal. The missionaries in the Gospel of Luke are from all orientations and from everywhere. This is very clear in the Gospel of Luke. It is only the Gospel of Matthew who has got a very long mission discourse. There are 42 verses in Matthew's mission discourse. And very strangely, if in the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Luke, both the 12 and the 72, the disciples go and engage in mission, in Matthew's Gospel alone, they are given instructions, but they do not go. Because for Matthew, Jesus is the only true missionary. And so in Mark, the 12 are sent out. In Mark chapter 3, verse 14, we remember when Jesus called to him those whom he wanted and they came to him, we were told he chose 12 first to be with him. Even though we cannot strictly speak about this in chronological terms, that is, they are first being with him and then are sent out. No, I prefer to use the word first to be with him because that is crucial to our understanding the mission. Otherwise, the danger is we can simply be like those who serve in NGOs or non-governmental organizations. Today, the kind of work that is done by the church is done by NGOs which are spread out throughout the world. Whether it is education, whether it is medicine, whether it is social work, whether it is working with women's groups, whether it is working with orphans, whether it is working with unwed mothers, whether it is working with the disadvantaged of society, any kind of work which the church is engaged in is also done by many, many others, and unlike those who serve in the church who have made no vows whatever. These are people who are as committed even without the vows. These are people who are being paid a salary by the NGO in which they are working, and in many, many cases, their work seems to be more efficacious than the work which the church is doing. One of the reasons I think why this is so is because somehow those of us who serve in the church have forgotten the prime reason why we were called or why we are doing it, called to be with him. We have forgotten this. So in a way, we are as any other social worker. We do not have any inspiration from the Lord. And so if we do not have inspiration from the Lord, then of course, we are going to work just as social workers. And unfortunately, when we do that, our work is neither efficient nor is our work efficacious. Mark explicitly mentions that they are sent out in pairs. And there are a variety of reasons for this. One reason is that the requirement of 2 witnesses. So for example, in case you had to confirm something, 2 witnesses are required. And so that would be the practical reason. There is also the reason for personal and moral support. So sometimes you get tired. Sometimes you want to discuss something. Sometimes you want to express a point of view. Sometimes you want to share something. What are you going to do if you are alone? No, you have somebody for personal support, for moral support. But also, because mission is not an individual enterprise, mission is communitarian. As Jesus sends his disciples out, he gives them a strategy. And while in Matthew, more clearly than in Mark, the strategy very clearly is of all the 3 evangelical counsels. In Mark, we can see 3 of them, but 2 are the regular evangelical counsels, what we call poverty and obedience. And the third one is very different, which I think we need to keep in mind and is in connection with the parable discourse which Jesus told earlier. So what is the strategy which the Markan Jesus provides? The Markan Jesus tells the disciples that they are to be detached from material things. So no bread. Even though Mark does not have the 3 temptations which we see in Matthew and Luke, and where in the first, which is bread, loaf in the Gospel of Luke, and loaves in the Gospel of stones in Matthew and stone in Luke. Mark does not have that, but the mention of bread is also for the fact that while bread is a staple food, so do not take any provisions. Basically, bread would stand for provisions. Also, the understanding that a human being does not live on bread alone. The not taking of a bag is in order that we don't store in the bag provisions for the next day and for the next moment. Because if you have a bag with you, it is usually where you put what is excess or what is not needed at the moment and may be needed in the future. So no taking the bag means that. No taking money is in order not to be able to buy your way out of trouble, not to be able to buy provisions when you're hungry. So if you don't have money, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to buy something. However, because the Markan Jesus does not want his disciples to be hurt physically when they are walking on cobbled stones, when they are walking on path which is unpaved, he asks them to wear sandals and to take a staff, both for protection against wild animals and outsiders, and also as a staff to support when you are walking and you're tired. The staff serves in a way as the third leg when a person is walking and if the person is tired. While they would take an extra tunic, they would not put on the second tunic, even though it may have been cold at times. So I don't put on the second tunic to protect myself from the cold. I bear the cold and I bear it courageously. We saw in an earlier lecture that when we look at the instructions which the Matthean Jesus gives, they are more stringent, they are stricter. In Matthew, not only are the disciples given these instructions of no bread, no bag, no money, they're also told not to wear sandals. And they're told not to take a staff. So in Matthew, the instructions are very, very challenging, very, very strict. And that's why this is one of the texts which scholars give to think that Matthew was written before Mark. So Mark saw Matthew and realized these instructions are so challenging that I will change them. I will tell my disciples to wear sandals and to take a staff. And so this is one of the reasons given for not accepting the two-source theory by the Neo-Greece-Markians. The disciples are therefore told to stay in the house. Now, what is the meaning of staying in the house? They should not focus on anything else, neither their comforts, neither their accommodation. The focus has to be mission. Now, first, if I keep on looking for houses, then first of all, I'm wasting time. Secondly, my focus is diverted to my own comfort, to my own well-being, rather than mission. And that's why they are to stay in the same house. They must not seek. Now look, once again, Matthew chapter 20, where we keep looking, and those who have hired in the morning keep looking at what the others are being paid, and so they begin to feel jealous. When I'm staying in a house, I'm comfortable, and often and unfortunately, I'm comfortable only until I look at somebody else's room and somebody else's accommodation. Then I begin to realize, oh, how much I don't have. Oh, I could also have this. I could also have that. Then the attention is diverted from the main point and the focus is something else. While Jesus, in the earlier verse which we just saw, gives his disciples what I would call a lesson in both poverty and in obedience, that is, finding what you can do where you are. That is what it means, stay in the same house. Here, in this verse, I believe is like a summary of the parable discourse. If you were to ask me, what would be one idea which we could draw from the parable discourse? I would have said detachment from the outcome. So we notice in the parable of the sower and the seed, the sower sows along the path, loss, doesn't matter. Sows along the rocky ground, loss, doesn't matter. Sows along the thorns, loss, doesn't matter. Sow along the good soil, 30, 60, 100. So we don't matter. It doesn't matter that they've sown on the path and lost, sown on rocky ground and lost, sown on the thorns and lost. No, it doesn't matter. In the parable of the mustard seed, such a small seed, doesn't matter. Sow it. It grows into a huge lump. The seed growing secretly. You scatter, then sweep, get up, and the seed will grow. So notice, in all of those, very clearly, one striking point is that you and I are called to a detachment from the outcome of mission. I do, and I leave what remains to God. I do, and the result is in God's hand, but I do. So you have to do. And then, if they will not listen, so shaking the dust basically is in a way a sign, is an action, which shows, okay, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. You don't want to listen to me? It doesn't matter. And the proclamation of the disciples is that everyone should repent. Notice, That is, repent, metanoia, to look at things in a new way, to put on that new mind, to put on that new heart, to put on that new vision. This is the call, that they must see new. Why must they see things in a new way? Because the kingdom has come. And the disciples go out and they cast out many, many demons. In other words, they are successful in their mission. Now, they do not return immediately. Mark interrupts the return by telling us the story of John the Baptist. Now, one reason for this third sandwich construction, that is, the disciples are sent on mission. The death of John the Baptist is narrated before the disciples can return from mission. And the reason for this sandwich construction is to show the identification of what will happen with John and what happens with Jesus and what will happen with Jesus, and also to warn the disciples that while sometimes mission will be met with a response from people who will accept them, however, sometimes mission will also be met with the response which is aggressive, which is a response that people will not accept. And so Mark introduces us once again. And you remember in chapter 1, verse 14, he already told us just in half a verse about the arrest of John the Baptist. After John had been arrested, Jesus comes. Now, 6 chapters later, he's telling us the whole story. What did Herod hear of? Herod heard about the success of the disciples. And the question is, who is Herod? Herod is Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the father of this Herod Antipas, and Herod the Great is the Herod mentioned by Matthew in Matthew's infancy narrative. This Herod Antipas was one of the many sons because his father, Herod the Great, had 8 wives. That is not as important for us now, and we shall see those that a little later when we come to the question of the party. But now, why did people say that this John the Baptist, or rather Jesus, was Elijah? This is the understanding. So there is one response here. Later in chapter 8, verse 27, there will be another response to the identity of Jesus. And in Mark chapter 8, verses 29 and 30, Peter will respond as to his impression of Jesus. But now Herod was being told, and this is what basically Herod understands, because Herod is indicating, the Mark is indicating here, that this is what the opinion of Jesus is. That some was saying that John the Baptist had been raised, and for this reason, but others were saying it is Elijah. So why Elijah? Because Malachi chapter 3 verse 1, which is quoted in Mark chapter 1 verse 2, had spoken about the messenger. And Malachi, in his work, in chapter 4 verses 5 and 6, mentions Elijah as the messenger. One of the prophets of old, later on when we talk about the 3 titles which they give, it'll be only one of the prophets. Herod, however, goes by the first opinion, namely, he thinks that Jesus is John raised. And therefore, this opinion of Herod sets the stage for the story. Now, in chapter 6, verse 17, we are told that Herod arrested and bound John. The references in brackets, chapter 14 and chapter 15, are the references to where Jesus will be arrested and bound. So by telling us this story here, Mark is already anticipating what will happen later on to Jesus. And so therefore, Josephus, the Jewish historian, in his history, Antiquities of the Jews, says that Herod was afraid of John's influence. That John was a very popular man, and because Herod was afraid and he thought that John could sway the crowd with his preaching, with his proclamation, because of that reason had John put in prison. Mark, however, gives Herodias as the cause. Deuteronomy speaks about what is known as Labyrinth Marriage, which the Sadducees later on in chapter 12 will quote when they give the example of a woman who married 7 brothers. That is the background. That is what is known as Labyrinth Marriage, mentioned by Deuteronomy. The Latin word labir means brother-in-law, and that's why it's called Labyrinth Marriage. That is, the brother-in-law had to take his brother's wife as his own if his brother died without leaving a child. That is called Labyrinth Marriage. However, Leviticus 18 and 20 very clearly speak about not marrying your brother's wife when your brother is alive. So Herodias is here, his brother Philip's wife. She was also the niece of Herod, that is the daughter of his brother Aristobulus. John is very fearless. The disciples went and cast out many demons. Mark tells us that John tells Herod that what he does or what he did is wrong. He cannot take his brother's wife because his brother Philip is still alive. And because of this, Herodias has a grudge against him, and she prompts Herod to put John in prison. A very brief idea of the background of what this means. Herod the Great had 8 wives, of which I will mention 4. The 4th wife was Malchus the Samaritan. There was Mariamne the Hasmonean. There was also another wife called Mariamne, and she was identified as the daughter of Simon the high priest, and Cleopatra, not of Rome, that is Cleopatra was BCE. This is Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Okay, so now these are 4 of the 8 wives which are relevant for us. Through his 4th wife, Malchus the Samaritan, Herod had a son who was Herod Antipas. Through his wife, Mariamne the Hasmonean, Herod had another son called Aristobulus. Through his wife, Mariamne, the daughter of Simon the high priest, he had a son named Herod Philip, and this is the Philip whom Mark seems to be talking about, because there was another son named Philip whom he had with Cleopatra of Jerusalem. Now, Herod Antipas had married the daughter of King Aretas. She was his first wife. Aristobulus had a daughter, and that daughter was named Herodias. What had happened is his half-brother Herod Philip, who was the daughter of who was the son of Mariamne and one of the sons of Herod the Great, had taken his own niece, that is Herodias, as his wife. With her, this Herod Philip had a daughter named Salome. Salome was later married to another uncle of hers, that is the son of Cleopatra of Jerusalem and Herod the Great Philip. So because of this confusion of the name Philip, some people think that whom Mark is referring to when he says Herod Philip is this Herod, but no, it is not this Philip. It is this Philip who had been married to Herodias, who was the daughter of Aristobulus, and this Herod Philip and Herodias had a daughter named Salome. So what Herod had done, he had then taken the wife of his brother Herod Philip. He had taken this wife when Herod Philip was still alive. This is the objection. Later, because he sent his first wife back to her father, there was a war, and a number of complications were created because of this war, even for Herod.